Hello and welcome to part 14 of our video series on building a Node, Express and Postgres based API. Today we're going to run through testing our user creation endpoint a little bit more. We've obviously written some unit tests, but what we're going to want to do now is test what happens when we actually start sending real data to the API, and then we're going to want to validate that that data ends up in the database when it meets the expectations of the validation that we set up. So what we'll do is we'll test our endpoint using Postman, and then we'll validate the data arrives in Postgres using a program called dbeaver, which is a great free database client that you can use to connect up to Postgres with. If you want to follow along, all the code for where we currently are is hosted in a GitHub repo, and there's a link to that repo in the video description, so you can pull that one down. And if you check out the branch part 14 start, you'll have all of the code exactly as I do here. So what we're going to do is we're going to be testing this user's post endpoint today, just to validate that when we send data to it, data arrives as we're expecting it to. And we're going to use that. We're going to do that using a program called Postman, which is a great tool for writing and executing different types of requests, such as like post requests, get requests, put, patch, delete. Basically, all the different types of HTTP requests that you could want to do, and you can write these and reuse them if you want to actually test what's going on. So what will happen when you launch Postman for the first time, you'll have pretty much a blank screen. We'll just need to change this to a post request. We'll put in the URL for the API endpoint that we're going to want to hit, and our service starts on localhost port 3000, and the endpoint that we're going to want to hit is the /users endpoint. Now, this is all in line with what we've got laid out in our API URL environment variable here. So if for some reason you change that, you'll obviously need to use a different either API URL or different port, depending on what you're doing. And what we're going to want to do first of all is we're going to want to set the header of our request so that it encodes data as we're expecting it to, because we're going to be sending data in a JSON format. So we're just going to add this content type application /JSON, and then when we go to the body here, what we can do is we can change that to raw, and we can actually just free type in our JSON here just to meet the expectations of the API. So we know that we're going to want a first name. We're also going to want a last name. We're going to want an email. And john.doe@test.com, and then we're going to want a password, which we'll just put in as password 123 exclamation mark. We'll just change that to Doe, John Doe. So once you've got that filled in, what we're going to do is we're just going to hit send, and we've actually got an error response. That's because we haven't started our service. So we'll start that so that it's all up and running. We'll resend the request to Postman, and what we've actually got here is a generic error that's coming from the server, which is a good reason for actually running these tests, because it's something that our unit test hasn't picked up, that this should cause an error, despite us writing some unit tests to check for that. So what we'll do is we'll just head over to our API here, and we can see that we've got an API error here that says query values must be an array. Now, I've been working with Postgres for quite some time, so I know that this error, or the type of error that's come back here, is typically something to do with the way that we constructed a query within our API calls. But if for some reason this error isn't super clear for you and you do want to get some more context into what's going on here, what you can do when we get to here, we can actually just do a console.log error within our error handling middleware so that we can just log out the entire error, including a stack trace and things like that. And then we'll just resubmit the error, and we've got error, resubmit, and then what we'll have is a bit of a stack trace as to what's going on. So we can see it's in the API source app domain user store.js line 13. So let's head over there and have a quick look. So we've got line 13 here. And what I can see immediately is whenever you're running a query like this and you're passing in commands to be or passing in values that will be replaced by the Postgres driver, it will pick those up from an array of values. So this email here should actually be wrapped in an array. Just double check. Yep. When we do the create user, we've got those wrapped in an array. And what's happened here actually is something that's fairly common and a good reason why you run multiple types of tests. When we've written our tests for this get user by email, which we'll have done in our store here, we've got get user by email. Because we never actually make any calls to the database because it's mocked out, all we're actually able to do is validate that what we say should happen in the test actually happens. And what we're missing here is we've got this function inputs here, which is derived from the database send mock. So when we query the database, which is this piece here, what we're doing is we're saying the second argument, we're expecting it to equal user.email. When actually what we want to be doing is we want to check that the second argument, which will be an array, the first item within that array will be user.email. So what we'll do here, we can fix that, because if we don't fix it, then what will happen is we'll get a failing test coming up here because it's actually not what they're expecting. See, we're expecting that email address within an array, and it's actually received just that email on its own. So what we'll do is we'll change that to 0, and then we'll rerun our tests. And now what we've got is that matching up with what we're actually expecting. So these testing of the API endpoint is really valuable, and it will pick up errors that your unit test perhaps won't. And what we'll do in future videos is we'll look at the another variation of testing known as integration testing, which will cover things in a non-mocked environment. So it will actually hit your API with a real call, and it will go all the way through to checking that that data has entered the database. So it'll do all of what we're doing manually here in an automated way, and it'll be what's known as an integration test. And I would highly recommend, if you're building like an API or any type of system really, have multiple types of testing across your application, unit tests, integration tests. It'll certainly add a lot more security to your code and make sure that you're a lot happier with it. So now that that's fixed, our service is restarted. What we'll do is we'll just do a quick send here, and what we've got is the body being returned to us, which is our user that's been created. So we've got a user with an ID of 2, first name John Doe, email address of john.doe@test.com, a password which is our hashed password, which is great, and then we've got a created at date, which is a field that we added on when we defined the table definition, or the table definition for our users. So we've got that there, which is great. Now what we're going to want to do is head over to dbeaver, and what you're going to want to do is, if you haven't got one already, we're going to set up a database connection, and all that's going to do is we'll just have some connection settings here, which will go to localhost port 5432, which is the standard port for Postgres. Database is the general, the bog standard database name, which is Postgres. Username is Postgres. Password is Postgres. And if you're unsure about what those values should be, you should find them within your Docker Compose YAML file, you'll have the username and password that your database instance will start up with, and then within your application they're also defined there as well, because it's the same type of connection that we're going to be establishing, just through a different channel. So we'll double click on this, head over to our Postgres database, go to the public section, users, and then what you may find is you may start off on this properties tab. Just head over to data, and we'll be able to actually see what's going on here. We'll be able to see that we've got our user that's been added and all the fields that we're expecting. And now, if you're curious, because what we did in a previous video was add some sanity checking to make sure that the same user cannot be created twice, we can actually try and resubmit the same body again, and we should find we'll get an error response with an email address that's already in use, which is great. And if we were to change these around and say let's go for Jane Doe and Jane Doe, but for some reason we'll remove the password. We just want to check that we actually want that. If we remove the password, then what we'll actually have is password is required. If we remove email, we'll find that we'll get email is required and password is required. And finally, if we, let's say, just remove all of it, we're going to test that we're getting good error messages back from the API that we've created as well, so that we've got a good set of errors that will be returned to the front end. Because in a real world scenario, what's going to happen is this is actually going to be sat talking to a website, and what you're going to want to do is when you get a message like this, you're going to probably want to highlight the fields on the input form or whatever that particular field is erroring. So we'll just what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and create this new Jane Doe user as well. We'll notice we've got an ID of 3, Jane Doe, and then if we head back to our database here and we how do we refresh? There we go, F5. We'll also find that we've got the Jane Doe user in the database there as well. So that's all that we're going to need to do for this particular video, which is just to check that the endpoint is working as we're expecting. We fixed an error that came up, which is great, and we validated that once everything's gone through our system, the users are ending up in the database. What we'll do in the next video is we'll take a look at those integration tests, because it's probably a good place to start for what we want to do. We'll make sure that this user creation endpoint is fully tested, both in unit testing and the integration tests. So once you're done with that and you're happy, check out the next video and we'll have a look at integration tests. But that's it for now. See you in the next video.